Hello and welcome to the webinar. The topic of today is Epic on Azure, getting hospitals out of the data center business. This event is presented in partnership thanks to our friends at Rubrik and Microsoft. Thank you to everyone out there in the audience for joining us on the webinar today. We've got a great discussion lined up for you. Before we get started, there's just a few things that you should know about the format of today's event. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'm glad to be serving as the host of the event. As always, we want these events to be educational, and we encourage your questions. We're former IT professionals ourselves here. We know how tough it can be out there in the world of enterprise technology. We want to help you to solve your challenges through this event. So we encourage your questions there in the questions pane of the audience console. Many of you have already said good afternoon and hello, and we love to hear that, but we also want your technical questions. So keep those questions coming. And we'll be doing a live Q&A session at the end of the event. We even have a best question prize to help further encourage your questions. I'll talk about that more here in just a moment. But first, I want to call your attention there to the Handouts tab. It's there that you'll find 3 important resources, starting off with a link on how to view the Rubrik and Microsoft Zero Trust Summit on demand. It's a really cool event. Make sure that you check that out. There's also a data sheet on how to run Rubrik, a Rubrik for Epic, I should say. Make sure you download that PDF resource. And then there's a link, finally, to book a meeting with Rubrik and Microsoft to learn more. So we encourage you to check out the resources in the Handouts tab. At the end of the webinar today, it'll be my pleasure to announce the winner of today's prize. It's for a set of Beats Studio 3 headphones. So that'll be a lot of fun. I'll be announcing that at the end of the webinar. And then we also have our best question prize we're running today. So if you have a question on the topic, post it there in the questions box. You'll be entered into our drawing for a $50 gift card. So keep those questions coming. Prize winners must meet the terms and conditions, of course, in the Handouts tab. And with that, it's now time to introduce today's expert presenters. I'm excited to welcome Natasha Loeffler-Little, who is a Principal Product Manager at Rubrik. Also, we have Marcus Henderson, a Senior Platforms Solutions Architect at Rubrik, and Himanshu Rao, Principal Cloud Solutions Architect at Microsoft. Natasha and Marcus and Himanshu, it's great to have you on the webinar today. I'll first hand it off to you, Natasha. Take it away.
Well, welcome everybody, and welcome Marcus and Himanshu. I'm super excited to have this conversation with you today because Epic itself is a pretty intense system to use, and then to consider taking that into the cloud, considering securing the data that's on it, a doable and also detail-oriented task. So we're going to unpack that today, and you two really are the experts on exactly this. So when we're looking at this from a Rubrik and Microsoft perspective, there are some common problems we know are already out there. And Himanshu, I'd love for you to first take this first piece of the most common thing that we've heard as hospitals and other labs and such that are using Epic are considering with the burden of managing data centers on-prem is just the simple, I don't want to be in the data center business. And so I'd love to hear from you first, some of the other pain points and the things that, as you unpack that, what else are you hearing that others on this call may be experiencing as well?
Absolutely. Thanks, Natasha. So yeah, so we've been talking with a lot of healthcare customer, and we hear a lot of feedback basically. And one of the common theme which we see is like most of our healthcare customer wanted to go out of the data center business, right? So one of the fundamental part is you need to do a lot of operation if you are in a data center, right? So that's kind of one of the cost center for the hospital and the customer. So that's one of the main reason we see. But also there are other things, right? Means they want to take the the existing skills and kind of like upskill their staff, right? So they wanted to upskill for the cloud. Basically, they don't want to just have them doing traditional managing the things in the data center, basically. Also, they want to get out of maintaining the data center for space and kind of try to tap in the new revenue stream, basically, right? So that's like a common theme which we see from the healthcare customers. Yeah.
Yeah. I think those are great points, and a lot of them operational in nature, logistical in nature, and then also looking at the strategic vision of like where is the specialty for the hospital and for the IT and infrastructure team within the hospital. And below that, I think here at Rubric we talk a lot about the data because that's exactly what we're doing. And so, Marcus, I'd love for you to also talk to us at the level of once you get in there and it's not just the space and the machines and the operational cost center, what are the problems that are coming up with cloud data and specific to the healthcare space?
Sure. Yeah. So, what we see, when we're introducing, cloud concepts to our customers is that, and you can see it on the slide here, there is sort of this paradigm shift that needs to happen. I mean, often you have a group of individuals that's in charge of building out infrastructure, specifically in those cloud environments. You have other individuals who, do the care and feeding, the operations, the day to day. And then you have this sort of data fragmentation that occurs as you go through your journey to cloud out of those data centers, where you do have some legacy applications that are kind of straddling the line between both, and it very quickly comes to a point where you're not sure how you answer even the most basic questions of how do I report on and prove out that I have these points in times and recover points that I think I do, and how do I effectively manage and maintain that across the environment. If you put that under the microscope that is Epic Honor Roll, I mean, it snowballs from there. It's quite the challenge.
It's a lot. Yeah, and I think that let's take another look at that, looking at
Yeah.
the operationalizing backups in particular, right? And I'm going to have you go ahead and walk through this.
Yeah, yeah. So, a lot of times what we see as, organizations adopt more cloud-based infrastructures is that they will employ, a certain group of people to build out these architectures. And these are done in sort of best practice manners, but, different applications will align to different subscriptions. And then you start layering in things and concepts that you have and you're used to in an on-premises perspective. So you'll look at data points like retention policies, frequencies, replications, expirations, data mobility, and you'll have to set these policies on a per subscription basis. And then you have to start building out, okay, well, I want high availability, so I need to ensure that I'm geo-redundant. And so as you start to layer these concepts on, okay, well, now you have to consider these things and these same concepts for each region within each subscription. And as you can see, this slide gets really busy really quickly. And if you could advance one more, if you layer on top of that, sort of the straddling of, the on-premises, concepts that you're also trying to maintain as part of your footprint, it gets very challenging. And that's sort of where Rubric fits in, and where we try to help is essentially triangulating and administering in such a diverse environment.
Yeah. And I think, hopefully everyone stays on for a bit more time and we haven't scared you with the amount of complexity here. And, this is really the point that we're trying to make is this isn't exactly a simple problem to solve. However, there are a couple of key things we're going to talk about here today to start to help you come away with some really specific things to do as you think about cloud transitions, as you think about securing your data. The first thing we're going to talk about is actually those security considerations. We're going to talk about new beginnings and some of the things you have to think about there, and then really important tech stack considerations. So as you go out and start to identify what is the right path for your organization, how you would get there, the idea here is that we're going to leave you with some really, really tactical pieces of information to research, and then ways to weight that information for your organization, and considering the market conditions, being able to answer some of those simple questions that Marcus had outlined. All right, so let's get into the first one, and securing your cloud adoption. There are, again, some infrastructure pieces that I'm going to have Himanshu talk about, and then we're going to dive into the data as well. And Himanshu, I'm sure you've heard this a lot, like this, we're safer in the cloud, right? Which is generally true. And also, there are some really important considerations that when you move to the cloud, you need to be thinking about from an infrastructure perspective. And I'd love to hear some of your points that you like to share with the market and with customers on this particular point.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are two part like there are two kind of thoughts of school sometimes I see with the customer. Like some of the customer feel like, hey, the cloud is not as safe. We don't want to go there, right? But then we see the shift where the customers assume that if we go in a cloud, everything will be safe. Like, we don't have to do anything. So by default, we are safe. We just need to go to cloud. But that's not true, because we believe that like security in a cloud is like a shared responsibility, right? So that means we can do the security at a certain extent by default, right? We make sure like the physical data centers are secure. We make sure like anything above like hypervisor and below the like operating system is safe. But then there are a lot of kind of like security controls and services which we are giving. So it's a customer responsibility to make sure they enable those security controls. They put those best practice in place, basically, and that make the whole thing more secure, right? And so, for example, right, so if customer goes in a cloud in Azure and they wanted to kind of like make sure that everything running in Azure is secure, and there's some continuous security tools is there which kind of like continuously monitor the security posture, right? For that, we have a product called Microsoft Defender for Cloud, actually. And this product help to assess and continuously strengthen the security configuration of your cloud resources across Azure, across other cloud provider like AWS, GCP, or it's on-premises. It's complete kind of like a platform as a service for the continuous security posture management. Help you to detect the threat and vulnerabilities and try to kind of like give you an automation recommendation to remediate that as well. Right? Another thing which is the like more we all currently go hearing about the AI as like one of the key buzzwords, right? But we have embedded the AI into our security offering as well. So the modern security approach is more a SIM solution where you have an AI-driven SIM solution, and we do have a Azure native solution called Azure Sentinel. So Azure Sentinel is our native SIM solution, which allow to optimize your security operations. And it do a lot of things than just like the normal security monitoring, right? It try to kind of collect all the data across your devices, across your data estate you have. It can be in a cloud or outside the cloud, and create the visibility of that data, and then apply the AI and analytics on top of that to do a real-time threat protection and kind of like monitoring, basically, for that. It also help the security team to kind of investigate the incident if they have any security incident, as well as some automations to kind of like remediate that. So to the point, like it's a shared service model. We want customer to, and we have a sort of guidance and documentation. So we want customer to utilize this guidance and the security controls to secure their healthcare data in Azure.
Yeah. And so there's a couple layers here. I would say, at the top level, you've listed some awesome tools that Microsoft provides to secure the network and the physical cloud assets that you've invested in. Again, going with a zero trust principle, finding those ways to add at the infrastructure levels some security protocols. And, tying back to what we were talking about earlier, if we look at this idea of hospitals getting out of the data center business, one of the pieces was upskilling or changing the skills for the staff, right? And using the technology such as AI insights with your SIM like Microsoft Sentinel to help you better understand where you need to respond, where you need to look. How do you really optimize those proactive tasks to then be able to secure the team, the investment, right? And then, the shared responsibility piece, I think this is a great tie-in to what I'm going to ask Marcus about next, which is the responsibility for the data. And then also looking at, in this case, the layers of recommendations that Epic provides in the guidelines and as an, what you can do to earn honor roll status. And before we do that, David, if you could go ahead and queue up the poll, we'd love to check in with the audience here.
Absolutely.
Where does your organization fall on the cloud spectrum? Go ahead, David.
Yeah, the question on the screen for everyone out there is, where does your organization fall on the cloud spectrum? We want to get your feedback on this. Do you have no experience with cloud? Are you just beginning the journey? Maybe you're in the cloud, but you still have a lot to figure out. Or maybe you're mature with dedicated cloud-only data centers. Select the option that corresponds to you and your company, and we'll share the results here, and you can see how you stack up with your fellow technologists on the event today. We'll give everyone a moment to respond here, and then I want to see what our experts think about the results. Let's get just a few more responses. Thank you to those who have responded. All right, and let me share the results now. And it looks like 53% are beginning this journey, 23% say they're in the cloud, but they have a lot to figure out, and 7% they're mature. Marcus, what do you think?
Mm-hmm.
This is super interesting. This is a pretty good mirror for what I would expect and what I see from a larger customer base as far as what Rubrik is kind of ingesting. Often when I'm speaking with customers, there's a lot of interest in pursuing a cloud-born data center or even leveraging it as a DR strategy. But there's also a lot of innate fear. Hey, I want to make sure I get this right. I want to make sure I do this in a cost-effective way, and I want to make sure I'm aligning to best practices, both from a Microsoft perspective as well as my EMR Epic, in this case. So, really interesting to see. I'm also super interested to hear from the one individual that said their organization is very mature. Always interesting conversations to have because everybody does it so differently. But pretty indicative of what I've seen across our customer base.
Yeah. And I think, as we start on that path, Marcus, thinking one of the things we'd like to ask the audience is to think beyond just Epic, right? Because is it your only concern? I'm going to tee it up for you that way and make the answer open-ended because the answer...
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. I mean, for most organizations that are running Epic, the Epic stack is kind of the crown jewels, but it's not the only thing that runs the business. And so what Rubrik is doing is, yes, of course, we want to position ourselves as the solution for your Epic workloads, but we also want to make sure you're getting the care and feeding for the rest of the infrastructure, and that kind of ties back into that shared responsibility and shared security model. Microsoft provides a lot of great coverage, from an endpoint and infrastructure perspective. With Rubrik being sort of in the data path, what we're able to do is a bit unique and kind of an additional value add there. In addition to being able to provide that resiliency, on your backups, we're also going to give you that comfort of in things like ensuring compliance. If we think back to a few slides ago when we were building out that really complicated structure across all those subscriptions, Rubrik can act as a unifying force and give you insight and visibility across that ecosystem. I think what's most important about that, in a language that's common, whether that's on-premises, SaaS-based offerings, more of a lift and shift, based approach. And then because we are capturing that data, we're able to introspect it for you and provide what I feel is one of our unique functions, a time scale, against that, and to complement that endpoint protection, as well as feed directly into some of those larger tool sets like Sentinel. That was mentioned before. And of course, what good's a backup if you can't ensure clean recovery and of course rapid recovery, also in line, with those EPIC guidelines and standards. So certainly it's something that we pride ourselves on, and we view ourselves as an all-encompassing solution, to that data pathway.
Yeah. That's great. And, so again, just reviewing some of those points, there's some really critical things that you should be thinking about for proactive management of securing your cloud investment, some specific things that you need to consider about the shared responsibility model, and most importantly, both with considering your EPIC investment, the all prioritizing the protection of all patient data, really looking at those zero trust principles for securing the data on the cloud journey that you're so many of you are beginning to embark on. And then with that, there's some very specific things that we want to talk about with setting this up, right? And Himanshu, here again, I'd like to have you talk about the idea of running EPIC on Azure and what that setup, that architecture looks like. What can our listeners expect when they begin this particular journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's all about three things, right? The three questions when you get started, right? First is hey, do the Microsoft provide any framework or any kind of recommendation, basically, to get started with the kind of in Azure, right? Because if there are many customers first time going in Azure, right? So that's the first question, right? Then second part is hey, do Microsoft also have any set of automation where I can start deploying things? Do you guys have any an infrastructure foundation best practices? So that's how can I put up my foundation, right? So, and how can I do that automatically, right? Is there any automation? We don't have to reinvent the whole wheel. So that's the second part, right? And the third part is hey, do the EPIC and Microsoft has defined a very well EPIC on Azure best practice and guidance or not? Because then you can fine tune those workload specific best practices on top of the Azure infrastructure, right? So to answer this question, we have all this covered, right? So example, we've been doing customer putting and migrating customer from their on-premises to Azure from last a decade, right? So we have a lot of experience and a lot of learning from our customer. We have our own internal learning as well. So we have a dedicated engineering team who created a cloud adoption framework for Azure. This framework is nothing but set of guidance, artifacts, automation, best practice throughout your cloud journey, starting from the defining your strategy, how you should be doing the planning and artifacts involved there. What are the kind of key setup readiness for starting your design and build process? And this is where we have a automation. We have a native automation with the ARM template. We have a Terraform automation. And then how you migrate and optimize your environment once you finish migrating on top. So that's a cloud adoption framework which kind of cover it. We have also some optimization best practice guidance as a part of the Azure well-architected framework. So, and this is where we are focusing on a specific area because we learn from customer that they want to increase. EPIC is a most critical application, right? So how they can increase the reliability of the deployment, how they can optimize the cost because we still charge, right? So how you optimize the cost, basically, what are the best practice for that, right? How I optimize the performance. EPIC has a very strong performance requirement that, you should have that many milliseconds, that is the performance target. So and then finally, how you optimize your operation and security. So at the infrastructure layer, we have a best practice framework called Azure Well Architected Framework, which kind of customers can use and apply this design principle, 5 design principle I mentioned, like reliability, cost, operations, performance, and security, to kind of optimize those areas at infrastructure foundation there, right? But then the
Yeah.
next third part is like, okay, so now I got my infrastructure foundation set up in Azure, but then what about Epic specific best practice and guidance? And for that, Microsoft and Epic has jointly created kind of like Epic on Azure reference architecture. And that's like a very detailed and prescribed document which talks about tier by tier and area by area, what are the kind of like best practices you should be applying in terms of everything, in terms of your identity and management, your business continuity, your network design, your security, operations, deployment best practice for Epic on Azure. So these
Yeah.
three things customer can use to get started for Epic on Azure journey.
Yeah, thanks for all that detail. And, Rubrik has done some very similar work, which I'm going to let Marcus elaborate on, in working directly with Epic to ensure that reference architecture, I think the guideline is called something else on the backup and recovery side, that the technology is matching the requirements for Epic. And then also, really, and that is important, right? I think all the detail you provided is great. And so if anybody missed those points, the part that's important is that you want to begin with something, at least in this case where we're talking about Epic as the starting point, because it is so critical, because there are these very specific operational and cost considerations that are, prompting IT organizations to be looking at taking this data center out of the physical space, moving it to the cloud, looking at the other things that are required to make sure it's still secure at the infrastructure and the data level. That you start with organizations such as Microsoft and Rubrik that have done the work, the groundwork, to make sure that that is in line with exactly how Epic expects things to be run. And then, of course, the cool thing is Microsoft and Rubrik have been working together for years now, doing things natively and smoothly together, which is a topic for another conversation. I think the Zero Labs report is in there. I'll just make a quick call out to that. Talking about the efficiencies that the technology can drive with your team is also a really critical part of this conversation. It's not the focus of this webinar, but I definitely check that out. And so to that point, I'd really love, Marcus, for you to go ahead and talk about some of the very specific Epic honor roll requirements that Rubrik has spent time investing in and working on to make that holistic integration, like we talked about just a moment ago, possible.
Yeah. So, I think often when we discuss with customers, I mean, there's a whole list, as you all know, of recommendations and as well as requirements. And things like the operational database backup requirements. I think those are pretty well known and kind of established. And of course, Rubrik aligns to those, both on premises and in the cloud environments. But often, when I'm speaking to customers these days, kind of the two top of mind things that get brought up the most because they're new are the requirement for Epic Web Blob backup, and then the new recommendation, soon to be requirement, for a secure backup solution, which of course Epic defines as having two-factor authentication, immutability, and multi-person authorization requirements. And I mean, we can kind of go through each one of these, but I think what's really interesting is how Rubrik has sort of adapted itself to be that point solution for both of these functions. If you look at the structure of, say, an Epic Web Blob, from a backup and data plane perspective, it's kind of the worst case scenario. It's it's unstructured data that's both deep and wide. And with this requirement to now back it up in a similar manner to the requirements that Cashier Iris has off of that source media, I think that initially, at least, caught a lot of customers off guard and made them question, hey, how am I even going to accomplish this? What's really interesting about how Rubrik approached this problem, though, is we actually approach it in a very cloudy way. So, the cloud dream is to be able to deploy stateless workloads that are ephemeral, that kind of spin up at time of need, API driven, and can kind of scale up and scale down as needed. And so, in the context of say an Epic Web Blob, we have a product, we call it NAS Cloud Direct, which allows us to deploy stateless data movers and actually move this data and back it up in a format and method that is faster than anything else on the market to date. Absolutely incredible speeds and feeds, and enabling our customers to hit these metrics when prior to this they were very concerned in even how they would get a backup, let alone meet the requirements set forth from an honor roll perspective. And kind of shifting focus to the newest. Was there a question? Or...
Go ahead. I was just agreeing with you.
Sorry. Oh, gotcha. And then kind of focusing in on the secure backup solution. What's really cool about this is Rubrik actually didn't need to develop anything, to align to this. Just out of the box, just by virtue of having Rubrik, just by turning it on, we already meet and exceed these requirements. And so this was actually something that we worked with Epic when they were trying to decide, how do we think the requirements should read, and the exact definitions. And so certainly something that we're very proud of and can discuss further. But I just wanted to kind of use those as sort of the initial use cases from an honor roll perspective of how Rubrik kind of aligns to that.
Yeah, and I think again, going back to how do you start this? You look at the resources that these other organizations are already invested in, right? Microsoft looking at the well-architected review, having the guidelines, looking at the core technology that Rubrik has had either developed, acquired, or natively built to help you, so you don't have to worry about that, right? Again, going back to what's the core problem? You don't want to have to worry about these things. And so this is a great segue into, Marcus, you've already mentioned some of these things, but we really felt like it was important to highlight specific things that you should be considering for your tech stack. And I'd love to start with this idea of thinking more holistically about your data resilience and some of the most important things. We have 6 that we typically talk about with respect to the tech stack that I'd love for you to highlight for our listeners to take with them for things that they should really be paying attention to for their data resilience.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So, just kind of starting with logical air gap, and I'm starting there because that's sort of central to the overarching system. Rubrik, sort of in our early days, it got started in where many of you on the call have gotten started, which is more in data center centric, build better backup, and we've extended our capabilities out into those cloud environments. But one of the things that we've carried with us, from that initial data center journey, is this concept of a logical air gap, offline backup, inability to discover or access backups over standard network protocols, so that we are segmented away from those adversaries. In sort of a lift and shift type of deployment, as well as on premises, that would be what we call our Atlas file system, which is immutable just by design in how we approach it, and is only accessible through the use of an authenticated API call, so it's actually off network and undiscoverable. And this is not something that you have to configure. It's just innate to the system. Kind of moving down the list here, encryption everywhere, right? This is, again, we feel at Rubrik that it shouldn't be a matter of having to configure a guess from a security best practices. We try to enable you to set those good choices by default out of the box. And so, as a result of that, encryption is enabled on our platform by default, end to end. Whether that's transport, and we're talking to specific clients, specific use cases, or even how we store that data. I touched on this already, but our immutable file system, it's proprietary in nature. We call it Atlas, and it is a unique thing to Rubrik that we built in-house, and this is how we store our data. So not only are we aligning with best practices from a logical air gap perspective through the use of that undiscoverable file system, but the file system itself is immutable, and data cannot be modified or changed in any format once it's been committed to that file system. Like any good provider, we're also going to be layering in access control at every level, right? So that way, as you build out your organization and as you have different stakeholders and owners for different applications, you can align very granular RBAC to map to those use cases and functions. And layering on top of that, Rubrik is also providing its own innate MFA. We call it internally time-based one-time password, built and baked into the system, such that if you don't have an MFA provider that you feel comfortable kind of using in that data path landscape, Rubrik has one built into our system. Retention lock here is, in our opinion, pretty table stakes. We have to have some ability to prevent, compromised credentials, rogue admins, things of that nature. And so Rubrik actually has two flavors of this. The first, and what we will call the lighter, addition to that, is a two-person rule approval to change things like retention policies, NTP, DNS settings, things of that nature. But in addition to that, we also provide a stricter alignment in which a support conversation has to be actually initiated for any modification to a retention locked policy. That support interaction will actually go out and validate the validity of that request through the use of predefined security and compliance officers. And the last stop on our spoke here is if all of those other things fail you, everywhere that Rubrik is in the data path, we also have this concept of an intelligent data lock. This is something that's inherent to our file system that we layered on top of. But out of the box, and this value is configurable, of course, anything that gets deleted by an administrative action will be held for up to 7 days in a hidden recycle bin, such that if you are able to catch it within that time frame and all of these other layers fail you, you can still recover that emitted data.
Yeah.
So it's all about layers at the end of the day.
Exactly the point I was just going to make, Marcus. Thanks for taking the words right out of my mouth. And, for those of you who are beginning this journey and you are looking at this list, unsure what to do with it, start with the basic definitions that Marcus just provided. And then as you go in and look at the two together, how Microsoft is layering this in, because right now we're talking about this from a Rubrik perspective, but these are, all of this has been done in conjunction with Microsoft to create a zero trust security platform, as you migrate different workloads to the cloud. Of course, we're talking about Epic today, one of the most important ones, and some specifics we're going to talk about here in a moment, again, for the tech stack. But these are core things that you need to be looking at as you're making that migration. So looking at the two together, and making sure that these different pieces of technology that you're putting together have this type of rigor is really that how you start to think about that holistic data resilience. And for that, I'd love to talk about this UCSF example, not protecting Epic with Rubrik, but maybe give us like a 30-second overview of this piece here, Marcus.
Yeah, and I think UCSF is important to call out, especially in the context of the poll that we got earlier. So they are a large organization that today consumes both Azure and Rubrik in pretty high quantity, but they still self-host their Epic solution on premises. And so, the way that they're consuming Azure is in more of a, long-term storage, type of capacity, but it gives them the operational flexibility such that if they did need to lift and shift, they could, right? They do have that ability to rapidly expand, and they are able, because of the way that they've implemented their strategy, to do that with high data mobility on that Rubrik platform, with us being able to seed that data either from, one physical data center to another, to even a cloud-based data center with relative ease.
Yeah, fabulous. Okay, so what we're going to do is talk about a couple more details with some of these tech stack things, and we're almost going to do it like a speed dating style, Marcus and Himanshu,
okay,
where we're gonna give like one-liner pickup lines why you should consider these different pieces. So time, right? Let's talk about unified data management, single control plane. What's your one-line pickup for that? Why is this important to consider for your tech stack?
My one-liner here would just be, this is operational awareness. Without it, how do you know you have your backup?
Great. And automated data protection.
Yeah, same sort of concept here. It's the ability to approach the data in a very cloudy way. As data spins up, Rubrik automatically detects and applies protection policies as they come into that environment without any user intervention.
Perfect. And granular recovery.
Yeah, the pickup line here is, sometimes you just don't need the whole disk back. You need one file. And this is a capability that Rubrik gives you. Hey, I need text document 123. Okay, well, here it is. Recovered right back where you need it.
Great. Cross-region export and replication, cross-zone recovery.
Yeah, this is all about, kind of solving. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Marcus.
No, I was just adding kind of mitigating the natural disaster. So that is the key point, right? So if you have a flood, this is what you need actually, right? Because Microsoft cannot help you to stop the flood, the whole region. So it's important to have another region ready.
Great.
Yeah, exactly right. Yep.
Okay.
Oh, you're good. Go ahead. Sorry.
Costs. Why is immutable blob storage? What's the pickup line for the immutable blob storage specific for cost?
Yeah, I think this is honestly one of the coolest things that Rubrik does in the cloud space. So as we're orchestrating and protecting things like Azure SQL and things like Azure VMs, what Rubrik is actually able to do is convert that premium snap storage consumption into blob storage, and then through a unique capability that's patented by Rubrik, we actually apply blob level immutability through the use of version control. And let's say your retention policy is 365 days. Immutability in the cloud space is a bit of a double-edged sword, because if you lock it, that's it. Even Microsoft says they can't unlock it. And so what Rubrik will actually do is actually lock something for a 4-week period, and then about 2 weeks into that, if we advance to the next piece, we'll extend that lock for an additional 4 weeks, and then again, until we reach that 365-day mark. And so what's really interesting and unique about that approach is it gives you operational recourse should you need to, you may have a legitimate business need to expire data prematurely, relative to that policy. The other thing that's really important here is it gives you recourse if somebody makes a mistake. We've talked a lot today about rogue admins, compromised credentials, but mistakes happen. In the context of we'll just call them a large healthcare provider I was speaking to, a few months ago, there was an instance where an automation script was put in use, and instead of 50 days, they put 5,000 days for a locked retention policy. And there was no recourse, right, due to the way that the immutability was set. And so this gives you that flexibility.
That's very cool. And I'd love for you to talk about, a case where a customer has made this full transition, a joint Microsoft and Rubrik customer, Legacy Health, and where we've landed with some pretty cool success.
Yeah. So this is actually, if you look at the cloud spectrum, what I would call a more mature, cloud consumer, to date. Legacy hosts their Epic environment completely, in the cloud environment. And what was really interesting about sort of the end result is, kind of coming out and going through their conversion, to Rubrik onboarding, we actually were able to perform better than their legacy solution that was hosted on premises in these cloud environments. And so today they leverage Rubrik, and obviously everything from an Epic perspective that they own is now hosted in that Azure space.
Very cool. Well, I'm very grateful for both of your time. I have the pleasure of working with each of you on different topics, and this one I think has been really valuable for those folks who are early in their cloud journey, looking at ways to secure their Epic investment, and thinking about that with not just the first steps, but also holistically and what's the long-term vision. And Rubrik and Microsoft together have done a pretty stellar job of making that feasible and secure. So I'm really excited to hear some of the questions, David, that have come up. Let's go ahead and hear some of those.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've got some great questions coming in from the audience. If you're out there, you have something on your mind, you're not quite sure if you should ask it, now's the time to get it in, because we've got our experts from Rubrik and Microsoft here ready to answer. I'm going to go ahead and start with this first question for you, Natasha. I believe we'll start off with you, and maybe you can hand it off to some other folks here on the panel as well. John is asking about, at his hospital, let's say that they move their applications and data into the cloud. His concern is around availability. What if they lose, network access to those apps and that data? What's your advice there?
Yeah, this actually is a great one to do, just like we've been doing on this panel so far. It has a hybrid. There's multiple ways to think about it. So I'm gonna start with Himanshu and then have Marcus add some best practices around those types of concerns, because we get that question a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the part is like if you have your hospital and then your internet is gone, basically how you access the cloud. Now, we provide multiple options here, right? So first is we provide a private connectivity from your hospital to the cloud, and this private connectivity has the built-in redundancy. That means we call as we brand it as a express route, which is a dedicated pipe going from your hospital or your data center to Microsoft Cloud, and it don't require internet. So and we give you by default a two pipe or two session, and we also have options to have that connectivity going through a different nearby city. So in case of internet loss, you still have a full efficient access to the cloud, because now you have that private connectivity. One goes down, another is still there, the session in terms of redundancy, and you can still access. And this connectivity is having a speed from a 1 Gbps to, let's say, 100 Gbps to connect to the cloud. And within a cloud, I think we talk about throughout the session, there are a lot of best practice Microsoft provide when Rubrik has the tools and capabilities to increase the reliability for your data and your application.
Mm-hmm. Great. Marcus, how would you talk about this also from the backup and recovery angle?
Yeah, I think if we look at maybe the spirit of this question, I think where it germinates from is, how do I sustain some sort of high availability failure, right? What do I do if I lose internet to my hospital, or a particular region in Azure is down? And I think from a Rubrik perspective, that goes back to those concepts of data mobility, right? Having the ability to move that source data around so that you can sustain those failures. So, in that context, maybe that looks like an alternate region within Azure to safeguard against a regional failure, or maybe that looks like, if you're in more of a hybrid model, an alternate data center or connection, such that Rubrik can actually recover those critical applications on site.
Right. Perfect. What else do we have on the list?
Yeah, some great options there. Here's another good question. This one's from Edgar. He's asking, does Rubrik allow you to spin up a virtual machine in a sandbox environment for testing or other purposes? Marcus?
Yeah, so we do have virtual offerings. As far as access and licensing and things of that nature, it's not like an open free download on the internet somewhere. There are security considerations around that, but typically access to that it's pretty light and easy. It's just a matter of getting in contact with the local or regional team and getting that aligned. But typically a pretty light lift if that's something you were interested in.
Excellent. Yeah. And here's another good question from Chris. He's asking, do you feel it's important to have different approaches to securing each of your cloud applications, or is it just dependent on a app by app basis? How does that work?
I think that at least what I've experienced from a Rubrik perspective, I think there does tend to try to be some sort of standard, and I'm speaking more generally, kind of outside the confines of like an Epic, right? There does tend to try to be a standard as we approach and look at kind of that full maturity model, consuming cloud services and providers, type of approach. And then as we start to kind of differentiate and look at more specific or important applications, crown jewels, if you will, that's where things like the special or more detail oriented determinations come into play. And so a good example of that is how Rubrik does inheritance-based policies and roles. Often what we'll see is there'll be tag-based infrastructure, rules to align to things like cost center, who owns what, and then right in there you can also align a particular policy to it. And that's sort of the nirvana, right? Everybody tags, but mistakes happen. And so often what our customers will do is they'll also set sort of an overarching, what we call a just good enough policy. Maybe it's a lower retention to ensure that, hey, if somebody does make a mistake, there is some sort of recourse in the event that you need to do that recovery, but maybe it's not as specialized as one of those sensitive applications that might take more time and consideration. I think that's where you were going with that, Chris.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, great answer. Thank you, Marcus. Let's see. Here's another good question. This one, another follow-up from John. He's asking about companies like his. They perhaps are a nonprofit, healthcare, education, don't have a huge budget to do cloud migrations. Do you have any sort of recommendations or advice for them, Natasha?
Yeah, I do. The call to action from this particular webinar was get educated on some of the considerations you need to make. And just as Marcus was talking about, there are some standards that are established. We've referenced a few of them: Zero Trust Framework, NIST, again, things not made up by technology companies, but things that are established by people who know about this, agencies, in that case, government agencies. Get started with some of that baseline information and things that you need to check into. And then really the work is engaging with these different vendors to help you understand how you can make that happen. And this is where I think you'll find that there are different programs, different approaches to help you figure out how that's going to plug into your budget, your team, your real estate, your landscape, the vision and goals of your particular company. So I would say, with that baseline set of information, don't assume that it has to go to the ends of the earth. You need to start to take those conversations to a more personal level, and investigate how that could be possible. So I wouldn't rule it out. I would start to have those conversations. Himanshu, do you have anything to add from a Microsoft perspective on that?
Yeah, so there are like a two-part, right? So first is basically for nonprofit, we do have from Microsoft side a set of grants, basically, right? So if you're moving to the Azure, you can just kind of like Bing it or Google it, saying Microsoft Azure for nonprofit or Microsoft for nonprofit. There are a lot of software donation program, as well as there are a lot of grants are there for, I think in Azure, we have like a set of Azure service credit per year as a grant the nonprofit can leverage. I don't have exact the number in my mind, but that's the one part. So there are a set of programs and grants are available for the nonprofit from Microsoft side to move it to the Azure, right? But the second part is also we have a lot of cost optimization tools and services. Recently, like last Ignite, we launched the Microsoft Azure saving plans where you can commit a minimum and you can get some discount on top of that, right? Like a good discount on top of that. We have an Azure hybrid benefit that if you have on-premise licenses for your Windows or your Linux, you can move it to the cloud and get discount. So with the cost saving and optimization, and this is where the Microsoft well-architected framework comes in a picture. There's a lot of guidance there. You can make sure that you optimize the cost and get it like almost 60-70% of the discount with those tools and services.
Mm-hmm. Fabulous, thank you, David. What else do we have on the list?
Yeah, I bet a lot of companies didn't know about that, so that's great to know. Here's another good one. Brandon is asking if you can provide any examples of hospitals that have successfully transitioned their data center operations to the cloud, and as well as the benefits that they might have seen. Marcus?
Yeah, so I'll start and then I'll kick to Manju, for his perspective. But I think there's a spectrum there. From a rubric perspective, we gave sort of two examples during the presentation. UCSF kind of in the beginning stages of that that cloud journey and consuming it primarily from a storage perspective. And I think really the benefit for them is rapid access to expandable storage that's cheap and deep, especially in the context of those requirements around things like PACS images, WebLob, where you do have such a large footprint of unstructured data. Kind of on the farther end of the spectrum where we are fully consuming that Epic stack and kind of running day-to-day operations from a cloud infrastructure perspective. I think there's a couple points there. From a data resilience, reliability, and uptime perspective, it's very challenging to beat what Azure offers. I mean, it's however many nines. I think it's like 13 nines. Now from that context. So there is a level of comfort in aligning to that infrastructure stack, and it also allows for shifting off of complex infrastructure. Floor space, in the data center, as well as specialized skill sets in maintaining that infrastructure. So it's a shift in personnel and cost and how that that hospital system consumes it. And in the context of the specific example we gave earlier with Legacy Health, it also translated to a faster, more performant backup than what they had and were used to, specific to the Epic stack on premises. Himanshu, I don't know if you have any specific thoughts around, transitioning from local data center to cloud that you can share as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we have some of the I think last few months before, some of the large hospital has migrated their electronic medical records, EHR, to Azure, and we see and then customer running from last few months, and then more time we see the customer has given us a feedback as some of the new ROI they're getting out of the kind of EHR data in Azure, right? And there are a lot of other things, right? Any EHR record which is going in Azure, basically, right? There's also possibility of taking that record and blending that data with other data. And running some AI on top of that to get more insight out of the data, right? So that's something also kind of one of the a new modern ROI we see with other workload customers are tapping in actually. So yeah, that's also another one thing which I should say about that.
Excellent. All right. Well, I'm afraid we're running out of time here in our webinar event. Final question I want to ask you, Natasha, and that is if this has resonated with companies out there, especially hospital organizations, what should they do to get started?
Watch this webinar again, maybe pass it on to a friend, share it with your team. Check out the handouts we have available. There are a number of events that Microsoft and Rubrik does together, and that would be, this is the learning chapter, making an experience out of it and checking out some of the things that are available for you to figure out how to personalize this journey and make that, take those first couple steps is really important. So I'd say, start to share, get some other folks on your team to help you start to understand how you can really turn this around to help you with all of those different ROI things that we talked about here, all those benefits. And then start taking those first steps with using the resources that are available from both Microsoft and Rubrik.
Excellent. All right. Well, this has been really excellent. Natasha, Marcus, and Himanshu, thank you so much. A great discussion. I learned a lot. I know the audience did as well. And of course, a big thank you to Microsoft and Rubrik for supporting the event today. I want to encourage everyone out there in the audience to check out the handouts tab before you go. Just a few more seconds left. There's a link there to book a meeting with Rubrik and Microsoft, as well as a data sheet and a link to the Zero Trust Summit on demand. So make sure you check out those resources. And with that, thank you to our presenters. It's now time for me to announce the winner of our Beats headphones. These are going out to Andrew Deacons from California. Congratulations. We'll reach out to you to deliver those headphones and also reach out to our best question prize winner. I hope that you have a great day, and we'll see you next time.